Hey, can folks hear me? Ooh, yeah, okay. Hey. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for sticking with us. A lot of Beaver content, and so we're excited to be here on day 2, or close out day 2. My name's Alex Funk. I'm the Director of Water Resources with the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, and we are here today to talk about the role of federal policy in scaling all the great work that we've been talking about the last day and a half. And we have a really esteemed panel here. Yeah, so with that, I'll kind of just like jump in. And I guess just for some table setting for the audience, what role does Congress and federal agencies play in addressing sort of beaver management issues? Because, you know, a lot of the wildlife management topics do tend to resolve around sort of state and tribal wildlife agencies, but federal policy certainly does play a role and is gaining more traction, which we'll be talking about. So everything from project permitting to public lands management and planning, and then of course funding, are all things that Congress and federal partners are really looking to kind of build upon. And excited to say, we are starting to see a lot of recognition at the federal level for this work. And so just for one example, last year's appropriations bill included some report language that recognizes beaver as an ecosystem engineer, as a keystone species that's helping address climate, wildfire, drought. And there's encouragement from Congress to have federal agencies that are working with wildlife and public lands and everything from hazard mitigation to endangered species recovery to think about beavers as a tool to achieve that. Now this is just guidance language. Agencies don't have to necessarily follow this, but it's encouraging again to kind of see this recognition occur on the Hill. And we're also seeing federal agencies, and especially within the Biden-Harris administration, we've seen a lot of attention around nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure. The Council on Environmental Quality came out with their guide earlier, I think last year, and it does actually mention beavers specifically as a tool to address drought and wildfire risk. And then our public land agencies, including the Forest Service, are starting to also recognize some of those connections, particularly around wildfire. Which is opening up some really exciting opportunities that we'll be talking about. There's also been some legislative interest. We'll learn more about the Dams for Beavers Act here in a second, but wanted to plug that there's also the Beaver Act that will be introduced here shortly by Senator Padilla, thanks in large part by all the success that we've heard from that California beaver restoration effort. And this would essentially create a new grant program at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to support beaver-assisted restoration work, and really gives an eye towards assisting states and tribes with existing beaver management plans and projects identified therein. And so we're, again, I think all this great work that we're hearing about at that state level is really starting to gain the attention of folks that are kind of thinking about how to scale this work at the federal level. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Hilary Hilary Henry with Senator Bennet. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the legislative work around forest health and source water protection and fire risk.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hilary Henry. I'm a regional director for Senator Bennet. Based in Grand Junction, I cover a lot of the Western Slope for him, but also work closely with our policy teams on forestry, natural resources, and public land. So really excited to be here today. Mostly I'm going to talk about funding, and I think a big bucket of funding that can be available to do beaver-based restoration is forestry funding. So Senator Bennet, give me 1 second here, pull up my notes. Has been a big champion for forests and watershed health. He sat on the Senate Agriculture Committee since the start of his time in the Senate and is in the chair of the subcommittee on climate, conservation, forestry, and natural resources. And in that role, he's been a really consistent advocate for more support for our forests and for watershed health. And particularly That's been particularly important to him because of the big changes we've seen in Colorado during his time in the Senate. We've had the largest fires in our state's history. We've had some pretty devastating flooding following those fires. There's been exploding growth in visitation and recreation. Colorado has some of the most visited national forests of anywhere in the country. And as we experience hotter, drier climate, drought has been critically important and a huge focus of his attention. And you can't talk about drought without talking about forests, particularly in Colorado, where our national forest supply 19 states, the country of Mexico, and more than 80% of Coloradans rely on water from national forest lands. So creating healthy watersheds and healthy forests is a top priority for the senator. And thinking about that, in 2018, he really championed the effort to put an end to the practice of fire borrowing, which crippled our national forests for years and resulted in chronic underinvestment. He also was an early supporter of the Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership Act, which allowed the Forest Service to address forestry challenges at scale and across jurisdictions, which you all know is critically important. That was really important work that sort of stopped the bleeding in our forestry budgets and finally allowed us to do forestry work in a more cohesive way. But the Forest Service still didn't have the resources it needed to make the sort of large landscape scale difference we needed. So in 2021, there began talk about a bipartisan infrastructure law. And Senator Bennet really made a pitch during that process that in Colorado, our forests are critical infrastructure and are just as important to our economy as the Brooklyn Bridge or the Lincoln Tunnel are to New York. And so he introduced a bill that would make a $60 billion investment in our forests so that we could shift more of our forestry work to be proactive, restoration-based, rather than reactive to massive, catastrophic fire. And he was successful making this pitch. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, he's secured $10.8 billion in forestry funding. And this is a really important down payment on all of the forestry work we need to do. But we know $10.8 billion is not $60 billion, and so we're still out there trying to get more funding for our forests. We currently have a couple of forestry bills that we're working to pass as part of the Farm Bill reauthorization. With Representative Coe, Senator Bennet has introduced the Protect the West Act, which reaffirms his commitment to provide the Forest Service with the full $60 billion that they need for restoration work. And he's also, with Senator Crapo, introduced the Headwater Protection Act, which ensures clean water for our nation's communities by reauthorizing the Water Source Protection Program, which was originally authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill, but had pretty minimal appropriations. So we're also increasing the appropriations for that bill from $10 million to $30 billion. And it also changes the watershed condition framework to make sure that healthy forests don't become degraded. We think that there's a big appetite to do this type of work in Congress, and that both sides, as you can see by the bipartisan support of some of these bills, are really interested in getting more work done on our forests. For a variety of reasons, we don't expect that there to be a Farm Bill reauthorization this year, or perhaps even next. So we're trying to think about what other vehicles we could get this legislation into. Right now, it looks like there's a forestry, public lands, outdoor recreation package that could be coming together in the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. And so we're working to try to see if we can get some of these legislative priorities included in that package. But I think what's really important, no matter the legislative vehicle, is that we think that the best thing we can do to make sure we keep securing the type of funding we need for our forests is to make sure that we're spending the funding we've already secured through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act well. So that means showing that we can have restoration success and by showing that natural-based restoration, including with beavers, is possible. And I think that's where everyone in this room could really be helpful to our office, all of the practitioners and scientists and agency partners. We need to hear about what's working so we can share your success and share your story. And also we need to know what's not working well, so how we can better advocate for you in Congress. So with that, I will turn it back over, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Hilary. And yeah, just looking ahead a little bit and building off the bipartisan infrastructure law, we do know that Congress will likely be picking that up in the next Congress in some shape or form. So hopefully there are more opportunities to kind of increase the pie for some of this natural infrastructure work that we've been talking about, and potentially even forming a Beaver caucus. I know the senator's been really engaged on this issue, so we appreciate that. Next up, we have Alicia Mars, who's the director of Western Water with the National Wildlife Federation. He's going to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing linking beaver restoration work with natural disaster mitigation.
Thanks, Alex. So I knew we were the last panel standing between all of you and happy hour and day 2, so I tried to jazz us up a little bit for some laughs. But as a former federal employee new to the nonprofit world, I know that the federal government kind of seems complex no matter what, but I think this complexity that we've been able to achieve in the last few years to be creative in how we can integrate nature-based solutions and beavers in particular and beaver-inspired restoration is a good thing. So we're going to touch on quickly a few of these things, and I've got my little beaver AI friend that I saw in somebody else's presentation today. He's kind of our Where's Waldo throughout the next few slides to just remind us that all of this is usually in some way, shape, or form inspired by our beaver friends or nature-based processes. So I'm trying to remember what my slides were, sorry. So first off, really, there's been some really great movement within the federal family in terms of how we build internal capacity in technical assistance, and our friends at the BLM in particular have been really great leaders in this space, so I'll let Melissa talk more about that and their partnership with NRCS. But at NWF, we've also had the opportunity to participate in some of these events, and so our team in Montana, as I mentioned if you were at our talk on Monday, has been doing trainings with BLM staff, most recently on beaver conflict resolution, and so that was virtual and in the field, and we're hoping, and that was BLM staff in the Montana Dakotas regional or state office, also with the Army Corps of Engineers, getting their staff out in the field from all across the country, and then there's been. Yeah, I think that's most of mine. Oh, yeah, so those are the virtual trainings, and you can see Shelby and Alyssa there in the little virtual boxes and other folks that were participating. So next up is targeted investments, and a lot of this stems from the bill and IRA funding that's come down the line. We've seen great success stories from a variety of agencies about how we can really concentrate those investments in, say, a watershed or a landscape to really maximize the benefits and then be able to tell that story to the communities or the voters to translate that into what kind of benefits we can really create together. So 2 of the great examples that I'd like to highlight. First up, this picture, this project was referenced. I think Joaquin mentioned it either yesterday or today. This is in the Sky Islands restoration landscape of BLM. This is southeastern Arizona. This is Cienega Creek, NCA, where BLM is going to use some of their, I think it's IRA funds, to do a beaver relocation project. And they're going to start, and they're working in tandem with the state of Arizona to do some LTPBR first to prep the site, and then we'll hopefully see some beavers early next year coming along. And then the other article here is a story that was in the Billings Gazette, I think last October, and then published throughout Montana as well. And really, it was a great piece highlighting all the different partners that are coming together on one of the restoration landscapes. I believe it was the Highline, Shelby. Thank you. And so this was a great piece to lift up, all the great diverse partners and benefits to the community and the private landowners that are also benefiting, because in most of these places it's a checkerboard landscape in terms of public lands and private lands, and so rivers run through it all, and if we're restoring the river, we're benefiting a variety of owners and uses. Ooh, I killed it. Okay. Happier is not quite yet. So We've also seen great examples, again, about how we can integrate beavers, beaver-inspired policies or restoration practices into policies and permitting. So here's a few examples. Mentioned yesterday the Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission. That was a congressional group with a variety of partners from across the country, utilities, land managers, fire agencies. They came to advise and provide guidance to Congress and then the federal agencies on how we can utilize these funds. In that, there's recommendations that include and recognize the benefits to process-based restoration and the inclusion of beavers and fire. And I'll touch on fire a little bit more, so don't worry, Alex. We've also got, how we can integrate beavers into forest planning. Again, this is a guide. We have a copy at the back table that folks can use when you're doing your comments on forest plans. We have seen great efforts towards streamlined permitting, statewide programmatic EAs from the state offices in Montana, Colorado, and Wyoming for the BLM, and hoping to see more. And there's a CX out there somewhere floating. We hope to see surface someday. There's also, I think there's a lot of benefits or potential, and folks are thinking more and more. We're not just talking when we talk about aquatic connectivity longitudinally, but also latitudinal connectivity, so widening, the riverscapes. So we've got the Interagency Fish Passage Task Force, which was a group that came together of federal agencies when all the Bell money first came down the line, thinking about how they could leverage the various expertise across the federal family to get the money on the ground as efficiently as possible and to the right projects. So when we're talking about fish passage, as we learned, it doesn't have to exclude BDAs, beaver restoration. If we think about widening and making more complex these riverscapes, which all in turn is benefiting the fish as well in terms of habitat. So there's ways to think creatively about these federal funding sources that can benefit these kinds of projects and the work that we're all doing in this room that may not be obvious straight out of the gate. And I think there's ways to leverage that federal family to leverage the information and technical capacity in addition to the funding. And then finally, oh God, I did it again. We might as well take advantage of some of our other friends that are getting a lot of money and a lot of attention, like sage grouse. And I know many of you are already doing it, but thinking creatively about how we can leverage those programs, those species, those funding sources to get this work done benefits everyone. And there's our beaver friend. So finally, wildfire. We've been thinking a lot about this, Alex, Amy Faye, a lot of organizations, in addition, of course, to Dr. Fairfax. This is one of the pictures that she took with one of her drones this summer when we were on the field tour that I think many of you did on Saturday. So that's our group. Alex really spearheaded the effort, but we got together many folks from federal agencies, Forest Service, BLM, Park Service, Colorado State Forestry Office, a variety of utility partners on the ground to see the benefits that beavers provide for wildfire resilience, and then to start those conversations and to really think about how we can be leveraging fire funding to also support these kinds of restoration projects. We're not wanting to take away from the fire funding, but leverage it and show the benefits that if we utilize not just the funding programs, but maybe even the workforce that's doing firefighting. A lot of those folks, wildland firefighters, carry similar skills that we need to build BDAs. Those are similar restoration jobs that we could think creatively about leveraging year-round. So it's really starting this conversation. And I'll just click through a few, put these on the slide, about how we can maximize and think to the greater benefit for all of us about how we can use fire or benefit from fire, even if we may not want to see it. So I think sorry, what can the rest of us do to help push our federal partners along or nudge them or encourage them, empower them? These are just a few of the examples of a collaboration of a few of us have put out in the last year. I really encourage you to find this animation. If you Google the title of that blog, you'll find either NRDC has it, American Rivers has it on their website, NWF, we have it as well, and you've got the animation there. It's wonderful. Amy McNamara at NRDC put it together. I think there's even a parachuting beaver. So that's your teaser. And then the fact sheets that we put together are on our back table in the back if you want to see them in real time. And there it's all leveraged in a dam.
Thanks, Alicia. And I think just to build like a finer point on what Alicia was just talking about, so like the linkage, so a lot of these public agencies have a lot of competing demands on their time and resources. So they're thinking about things like drought, wildfire, stage drought recovery. They're not necessarily thinking about BDAs and beaver restoration work or aquatics work generally. And that is often reflected in the budgets available for those programs. So we're talking about billions of dollars for wildfire risk reduction, maybe thousands to millions for aquatic restoration work, and that's often spread across things like aquatic organism passage and not just BDA. So again, by linking these things together, we can open up new funding pathways, but that really has to be heard at the top of the agencies. And so it's really important that we're highlighting these successes, the science, and working to migrate that up, because these are massive federal agencies that aren't necessarily like have like a flow of communication that are sharing that resource. So it's really important that we do that. So with that segue, I want to turn it over to Melissa Dickard, who's the Senior Riparian Specialist with the Bureau of Land Management, who we've heard throughout the day is really a leader on this effort. So Melissa.
Hi. I can't tell you how excited I am to hear that BLM is a leader on something, because we always think of ourselves as like the little engine that could, the little kind of stepchild agency. I ran just a back of the envelope calculation a few years ago. I'm sure that it's been updated, the numbers aren't updated in my calculation, but the Park Service got $52 an acre, the Forest Service got $26 an acre, and we got $4.26 an acre to manage federal lands. So for those of you who may not be aware of the BLM, we are the largest landowner in the US. We have about 300 million acres, stretched mostly across the western US, although we do manage subsurface mineral rights throughout the US. Lots of land up in Alaska, all the way down kind of, west of the 100th meridian, basically. So just to highlight some things, Alden gave a great presentation this morning. If hopefully you guys were here to catch that. He talked about a lot of the work we're doing. But so a couple of the things I'll mention may overlap with some of the things that he said. But as far as policy, we're working to make it a lot easier to do this kind of work. I was really excited to see the slide that Alex put up to kind of start us off, because we are starting to see that recognition that beaver are an important tool for managing our landscapes. We have included it in a new policy manual. We don't tend to update our policies very often. They're about once every 20 years, unfortunately. So that's a pretty big step forward to get riverscapes health included in our policy manual. We also have the public lands rule that I think a lot of you are familiar with, which encourage us to, right now there are 19 different ways of defining healthy lands across the BLM, and our public lands rule directs us to look at that with a single set of standards so that we can look at more holistically at lands across the landscape. And we're working hard to make sure that healthy riverscapes concepts are included in those land health standards. We're actually pulling out aquatic standards separately from the upland standards, which should help those efforts. The public lands rule also helps us do these assessments at watershed scale. And we're lucky to have partnered with USU over the past several years with the Riverscapes Consortium and been working with Joe Wheaton's group. And we now just recently worked with them to run the Riverscapes metrics for all of the lower 48. So that gives us some pretty powerful information to talk about our riverscapes. It'll give us data, for example, what percentage of our riverscapes are connected to the floodplain. That's where a lot of the stats up here came from. I just wanted to post that to kind of give you some things to chew on while I'm yapping away here. As far as budget, we have the bill and the IRA money as a catalyst. My last count, we had about 80 million headed for restoration, and we were lucky to save about 20 million of that at headquarters to fund some bigger initiatives. We're really excited about those. So we're partnered with the Nature Conservancy and with Trout Unlimited for a total of about $19 million to do basically a riverscapes initiative across the West. What we're trying to do with this is to be really strategic, to set ourselves up not just for current success, but also for future success. So we're working hard to make sure we're using those funds to build an infrastructure that not just the BLM, but all of you could access in terms of, the data from the Riverscapes Consortium, the tools and design capabilities that they have, databases that are holding these projects, and then on into implementation. We've done some workshops. This has been, as Alicia mentioned, in partnership with NRCS. So we have more work to do, but we're starting to use these projects to catalyze efforts with other federal agencies and really work as a federal family. We are using those trainings with the intent of building not just a workforce that can go out and do the projects that are funded by this $19 million, but to really create a pipeline of professionals. So we have people moving through almost kind of an apprentice journey level, master level concept. It's not formal. So that those folks will be available in out years to work on projects, maybe in their own backyards, maybe at the state level, maybe with some of you folks. Let's see. We're also pursuing some funding with the BOR under their Bucket 2 IRA funding. So if any of you want to put in a good word for us, it's a really awesome project that I'm getting really excited to submit. We're hoping to have some more money to work in the upper Colorado River and to kind of intensify this same kind of work. Let me back up once. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that the TU and TNC money is primarily being focused in those restoration landscapes that Alicia had on the slide. That was the one over here that talked about the BLM lands. And the idea there is, as we've seen just a little bit ago, I think it was the panel that Mark Beardsley was leading, you can look at beaver restoration at all different scales, and we know that we need to start showing not just, a dot here and a dot here and a dot here, but we need to be starting to show uplift across full watershed systems. So we're looking for long stretches, 20-mile stretches of continuous projects that we can fund. Our goal is to restore at least 500 miles of riverscapes in the next few years, and I'm hoping that we'll blow far past that. The last point I wanted to make, and again, Alden did a great job summarizing this morning, is just pushing that paradigm shift. Again, as we've talked some today and yesterday, I think our own practitioners, our own wildlife biologists and range conservationists go out on the land and they see a stream running in a long line and they see green stuff growing on each side of it and they go, okay, great, that's in maybe properly functioning condition, which is a term that we use in the BLM. And we're realizing that some of those systems are really good systems to restore because you've kind of got all the pieces there. You could get beaver introduced relatively easily, and all of a sudden you've got this broad floodplain functioning in a much better system. There are also areas that would be at bigger risk. You would lose a lot more if they get hit with drought or a big flood or something like that. So we need to help our own staff understand what, this new idea of what a riverscape is or what a, connected floodplain should look like so that we can start understanding where our best opportunities are for that kind of restoration. I think that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Melissa. Next up, we have Ericca Gandolfo, who's the Senior Policy Associate with the Animal Welfare Institute, and then Allison Ludtke. Ludtke. Yeah, thanks, Ericca. Legislative Affairs Manager with the Animal Legal Defense Fund, and we'll be talking about the Dams for Beavers Act.
Thanks so much, Alex, and really excited to be here. I was at last BeaverCon, and the Dams for Beavers Act was merely an idea. We didn't have a sponsor. There was no appropriations language, and now there's going to be a number of federal bills introduced, and we've just had so much success, as you've heard from this panel. I'm just here to offer some background on how the Dams for Beavers Act came to be, and then Ericca is sort of going to touch on where we stand now and what lies ahead. So I previously worked with the Animal Welfare Institute covering wildlife coexistence issues, and something that my colleague Zach and I noticed was that Wildlife Services was killing quite a large number of beavers for seemingly fixable issues, and that was related to infrastructure damage. We were familiar with the Beaver Institute and the great work they do with coexistence measures, and so wanted to find a way to address this federally. As has been mentioned throughout the panel, obviously dealing with beavers federally can get a little bit complex. They are not a listed species under the ESA. They're managed and regulated and defined in a number of different ways across the states. And so, again, what has been mentioned and I think hammered home was that funding, although the government sometimes chooses not to fund itself, was the most strategic way to address this issue. So we came up with the Dams for Beavers Act, which is a federal grant program at $3 million a year to support non-lethal coexistence measures. And notably, I would be remiss not to acknowledge that obviously both of our groups are animal protection groups, first and foremost. However, we totally recognize that this, like any issue, does not exist in a vacuum. And especially on the federal level, you know, we've really prioritized common sense, realistic policy solutions. And so when undertaking this, we knew that we were going to have to reach out, form a large coalition, and you know, chat with experts that clearly knew more about this than us. The folks on the ground, many of you in this room who helped develop this bill text. And so we also sort of viewed this as a stepping stone, which, you know, referenced at the beginning. We're growing the beaver issues that are addressed at the federal level, and so really excited to see that. So as some background as far as coalition building, we engaged with experts, various stakeholders, environmental NGOs, tribes, scientists, and folks on doing the work on the ground. And so for us, wide-ranging support, both regionally and programmatically, meant a better chance for bipartisan support. We received over 100+ endorsements from groups, again, many in this room, from 33 states. And so that regional diversity was key in finding a lead on this. As has been mentioned, you know, constituents matter, you guys matter, your voices matter. And so having that representation and showing how much people cared about beavers and were doing the work was immensely helpful in finding a lead in the House. So we shopped this idea around in 2021 and 2022. And I should note there was some skepticism and laughter. I think now it's really refreshing that there seems to be some beaver believers on the Hill, but many offices weren't sold on it. And so this kind of forced us to flesh out, you know, our framing of the issue. We really leaned into cost savings, which, as with funding, is a big priority for Congress. You know, how are you going to pay for this? Why is this a good use of tax dollars? We highlighted the damage reduction of infrastructure, the climate benefits, and just sort of rebranding beavers as a nature-based solution, not a nuisance. And so having that standalone bill, as we call it, a single bill, Schoolhouse Rock will tell you that that is how a bill becomes a law, in which one single bill is then signed into law. I wish it worked like that, but it does not. And so the appropriations package was mentioned, a potential, you know, wildlife package. That's how things move. So we didn't have that standalone bill for messaging. So unfortunately, weren't able to get it in Build Back Better, the IRA. But at the end of the 117th Congress, we found a great partner who's now a Beaver believer in Congresswoman Del Bennet of Washington. And we've heard throughout the conference the great work going on in the state of Washington. And so it was just the perfect fit, really. So thanks to all the support from folks in this room, that's really what made this happen. And the public awareness of beavers has obviously skyrocketed on and off the hill, and is putting us on a path to, expanded federal efforts. So just here to really say a big thank you to you all. And I'll pass it over to Ericca to go over what lies ahead for the 119th Congress.
Thanks so much, Allison. Yes, so as Allison mentioned, while the bill didn't move in the 117th Congress, the introduction of the Dams for Beavers Act gave us a place to message from and enabled us to start pushing other paths for the 118th Congress, as well as now the 119th Congress, to hopefully advance the issues through other vehicles. Appropriations being a major one, as Alex and Allison have mentioned, those language wins were really significant for our path forward. Through conversations during the appropriations cycle, we identified more allies willing to champion beaver coexistence and engage in the work at the federal level than we had ever seen in Congress. This was particularly exciting because it signaled a growing appetite for bicameral legislation, raising the possibility of multiple standalone bills in both chambers of Congress, a path that, in a functional Congress, does make it more likely for a bill to eventually get signed into law. Throughout these discussions, we've also had the opportunity to collaborate with more congressional staff who bring new strategy ideas and insights, whether from their own experience on the Hill in the relevant committees or from their engagement with local stakeholders. This has been invaluable in strengthening the path forward for standalone bill opportunities and their success. We've worked very closely with our champions in Congress and their Beaver Believer staff to update the bill text, ensuring it remains collaborative and reflects the most up-to-date, on-the-ground expertise from experts like many of you here today. You all know who you are, and we are incredibly grateful for your work and continued engagement with organizations like ours and members of Congress. If you or your group are interested in supporting bills this Congress, next, or beyond, please connect with us afterward. We would love to gather your contact information for potential endorsements. And lastly, we want to leave you with another way to make an impact. When there is a bill you support, whether it's related to beavers or another issue that is near and dear to your heart, contact your representatives and senators. Organizations like AWI and ALDF have action centers on our websites with ready-made scripts allowing you to send emails or leave voicemails in a quick 2 minutes. It might seem like this message disappears into the void, but Hill staff keep track of the issues they are hearing about. The issues with the most constituent outreach are more likely to be flagged as priorities to the boss. Your expertise and on-the-ground experience are crucial to raising these issues in the halls of Congress, and we can't emphasize enough how important your voice is. Thank you for all your time and the hard work you carry out day after day to shape a better tomorrow.
So I think we have time for one question, and Allison, you kind of touched on this, but kind of given the bipartisan focus of Congress, and generally, I would say for the whole panel, as we're thinking about how we continue to socialize some of the benefits associated with beaver-assisted restoration and coexistence work, briefly, I guess, what are some of the talking points that you're seeing kind of traction on with a wide swath of offices? Which messaging items aren't maybe being as impactful? And I guess how can the practitioner community and science community kind of help fill gaps in that messaging?
I'm happy to jump in, yeah. I think, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, as sort of crass as it sounds, the funding component, the cost savings, cost benefit analysis, making the issues budget neutral when possible, because what we're dealing with is a really divided Congress that, is struggling with funding and giving the agencies what they need to implement their work. So I'd say if you can ever highlight the cost savings and benefits, that's super helpful. Additionally, I think like fleshing out sort of what climate change is, it's kind of an abstract concept to a lot of these offices. And so giving concrete examples of the first thing that comes to my mind is, wildfires has been, I think, an effective tool.
Yeah, I think really touching on that, of course you do have to, depending on the office you're talking to, maybe not use the word climate change, but still underscoring the impacts of climate change and the fact of flooding, fires. A huge one too is also the habitat restoration, specifically in helping endangered populations of fish. That really piques people's ears. But yeah, it's really about looking at specifically what infrastructure has been impacted by beaver activity in certain states, putting a value cost to that damage, underscoring what the alternatives look like at that price point that Allison mentioned, and then, yeah, underscoring the ecological benefits that they have.
I'll just add quickly, I think we know, but there's never been a moment like this for water in the West. And I think whatever we can make that nexus between beavers and the benefits they're providing for drought, especially if we can't use the word climate change, use drought, that usually works. And I think that connection, especially with wildfire as well, will sell and be bipartisan no matter what landscape we end up in a few weeks. So, and then just stressing the multi-benefit nature of these projects, I think it really can hit anybody in the right spot.
Yeah, and I guess I'll close by, I think we're having some success too in terms of like regulatory pressure release, so like endangered species recovery. Folks want to get those things delisted, beavers can help. So again, I think it's like trying to be creative in terms of where you see those benefits, but we have to hear those stories. There's a lot of folks working on the Hill in DC that are not in the field. We're trying our best to find all those case studies and great projects that we've been hearing about, but definitely keep sharing those, and that'll be super helpful in terms of kind of continuing to move the needle on this. So I think that's kind of all the time we had. There's a really big election coming up, so definitely vote, and we hope to really build some momentum on this issue in the next Congress and with the administration. So with that, we'll let you all loose, and yeah, thanks all for the panel.